All right, welcome back to the reading of Charlie and the Chocolate Factory. We're going to pick up from where we left off last time. As a recap for what happened last time, pretty much Charlie was told about Willy Wonka's beautiful factory and Mr. Willy Wonka, who's this very mysterious gentleman who owns a factory and makes chocolate. So last time, no one has ever been in the factory. So he printed 5 golden tickets that he put into 5 chocolate bars, and whoever was the lucky person to find one of the golden tickets gets to go to the factory. So far, there's only been 2 tickets that were found, so there's 3 more, and Charlie is hoping that he will find one on his birthday. Chapter 7, Charlie's Birthday. "Happy birthday!" cried the 4 old grandparents as Charlie came into the room early the next morning. Charlie smiled nervously and sat down on the edge of the bed. He was holding his present, his only present, very carefully in his 2 hands. "Wonka's Whipple Scrumptious Fudge Mallow Delight," it said on the wrapper. The 4 old people, 2 at either end of the bed, propped themselves up on their pillows and stared with anxious eyes at the candy bar in Charlie's hands. Mr. and Mrs. Bucket came in and stood at the foot of the bed, watching Charlie. Mr. and Mrs. Bucket came in and stood. The room became silent. Everybody was waiting for Charlie to start opening his present. He looked down at the candy bar. He ran his fingers slowly back and forth along the length of it, stroking it lovingly, and the shiny paper wrapper made little sharp crackling noises in the quiet room. Then Mrs. Bucket said gently, "You mustn't be too disappointed, my darling, if you don't find what you're looking for underneath that wrapper. You really can't expect to be as lucky as all that." "She's quite right," Mr. Bucket said. Charlie didn't say anything. "After all," Grandma Josephine said, "in the whole wide world, there are only 3 tickets left to be found." "The thing to remember," Grandma Georgina said, "is that whatever happens, you'll still have the bar of candy. Wonka's Whipple Scrumptious Fudge Mellow Delight," cried Grandpa George. "It's the best of them all. You'll just love it." "Yes," Charlie whispered. "I know. Just forget all about those golden tickets and enjoy the candy." Grandpa Joe said, "Why don't you do that?" They all knew it was ridiculous to expect this one poor little candy bar to have a magic ticket inside it, and they were trying as gently and as kindly as they could to prepare Charlie for the disappointment. But there was one thing that the grown-ups also knew, and it was this, that however small the chance might be of striking lucky, the chance was there. The chance had to be there. This particular candy bar had as much chance as any other of having a golden ticket. And that was why all the grandparents and parents in the room were actually just as tense and excited as Charlie was, although they were pretending to be very calm. "You'd better go ahead and open it up, or you'll be late for school," Grandpa Joe said. "You might as well get it over with," Grandpa George said. "Open it, my dear," Grandma Georgina said. "Please open it, you're making me jumpy." Very slowly, Charlie's fingers began to tear open one small corner of the wrapping paper. The old people in the bed all leaned forward, craning their scraggy necks. Then suddenly, as though he couldn't bear the suspense any longer, Charlie tore the wrapper right down the middle, and into his lap there fell a light brown, creamy-colored chocolate candy bar. There was no sign of a golden ticket anywhere. "Well, that's that," said Grandpa Joe brightly. It's just what we expected. Charlie looked up. 4 kind old faces were watching him intently from the bed. He smiled at them, a small, sad smile, and then he shrugged his shoulders and picked up the candy bar and held it out to his mother and said, Here, mother, have a bit. We'll share it. I want everybody to taste it. Certainly not, his mother said, and the others all cried, No, no, we wouldn't dream of it. It's all yours. Please, begged Charlie, turning round and offering it to Grandpa Joe. But neither he nor anyone else would take even a tiny bite. It's time to go to school, my darling, Mrs. Bucket said, putting an arm around Charlie's skinny shoulders. Come on, or you'll be late. Chapter 8. 2 more golden tickets found. That evening, Mr. Bucket's newspaper announced the finding of not only the 3rd golden ticket, but the 4th as well. 2 golden tickets found today, screamed the headlines. Only 1 more left. All right, said Grandpa Joe, when the whole family was gathered in the old people's room after supper. Let's hear who found them. The 3rd ticket, read Mr. Bucket, holding the newspaper up close to his face because his eyes were bad and he couldn't afford glasses. The 3rd ticket was found by a Miss Violet Burgard. There was great excitement in the Burgard household when our reporter arrived to interview the lucky young lady. Cameras were clicking and flashbulbs were flashing and people were pushing and jostling and trying to get a bit closer to the famous girl. And the famous girl was standing on a chair in the living room, waving the golden ticket madly at the arm's length as though she were flagging a taxi. She was talking very fast and very loudly to everyone, but it was not easy to hear all she had said because she was chewing so ferociously upon a piece of gum at the same time. I'm a gum chewer normally, she shouted. But when I heard about these ticket things of Mr. Wonkas, I laid off the gum and switched to candy bars in the hope of striking lucky. Now, of course, I'm right back on gum. I just adore gum. I can't do anything without it. I munch it all day long, except for a few minutes at mealtimes, when I take it out and stick it behind my ear for safekeeping. To tell you the honest truth, I simply wouldn't feel comfortable if I didn't have that little wedge of gum to chew on every moment of the day. I really wouldn't. My mother says it's not ladylike, and it looks ugly to see a girl's jaw going up and down like mine do all the time, but I don't agree. And who is she to criticize anyway? Because if you ask me, I'd say that her jaws are going up and down almost as much as mine are just from yelling at me every minute of the day. Now, Violet, Mrs. Burgard said from the far corner of the room where she was standing on the piano to avoid being trampled by the mob. All right, mother, keep your hair on, Miss Burgard shouted. And now she went on, turning to the reporters again. It may interest you to know that this piece of gum I'm chewing right at this moment is one I've been working on for almost 3 months solid. That's a record, that is. I've beaten the record held by my best friend, Miss Cornelia Pritzmetal. And was she mad? It's my most treasured possession now, this piece of gum is. At nights, I just stick it on the end of the bedpost, and it's as good as ever in the mornings. A bit hard at first, maybe, but it soon softens up again after I've given it a few good chews. Maybe I started chewing for the world record. I used to change my piece of gum once a day. I used to do it in our elevator on the way home from school. Why the elevator? Because I liked sticking the gooey piece that I just finished with onto one of the elevator buttons. Then the next person who came along and pressed the button got my old gum on the end of his or her finger. Ha, what a racket they kicked up, some of them. You get the best results with women who have expensive gloves on. Oh yes, I'm thrilled to be going to Mr. Wonka's factory. And I understand that afterwards he's going to give me enough gum to last me for the rest of my life. Beastly girl, said Grandma Josephine. Despicable, said Grandma Georgina. She'll come to a sticky end one day, chewing all that gum. You see if she doesn't. And who got the fourth golden ticket, Daddy? Charlie asked. Now let me see, said Mr. Bucket, peering at the newspaper again. Ah, yes, here we are. The fourth golden ticket, he read, was found by a boy called Mike TV. Another bad lot, I'll be bound, muttered Grandma Josephine. Don't interrupt, Grandma, said Mrs. Bucket. The TV household, said Mr. Bucket, going on with his reading, was crammed like all the others with excited visitors when our reporter arrived. But young Mike TV, the lucky winner, seemed extremely annoyed by the whole business. Can't you fools see I'm watching television? He said angrily. I wish you wouldn't interrupt. The 9-year-old boy was seated before an enormous television set with his eyes glued to the screen, and he was watching a film in which one of the gangsters was shooting up another bunch of gangsters with machine guns. Mike TV himself had no less than 18 toy pistols of various sizes hanging from belts around his body, and every now and again he would leap up into the air and fire off half a dozen rounds from one or another of these weapons. Quiet, he shouted when someone tried to ask him a question. Didn't I tell you not to interrupt? This show is an absolute whiz-banger. It's terrific. I watch it every day. I watch all of them every day, even the crummy ones where there's no shooting. I like the gangsters best. They're terrific, those gangsters, especially when they start pumping each other full of lead or flashing the old stilets or giving each other the 1, 2, 3 with their knuckle dusters. Oh boy, what wouldn't I give to be doing that myself? It's the life, I tell you, it's terrific. That's quite enough, snapped Grandma Josephine. I can't bear to listen to it. Nor me, said Grandma Georgina. Do all children behave like this nowadays? Like these brats we've been hearing about? Of course not, said Mr. Bucket, smiling at the old lady in the bed. Some do, of course, in fact. Quite a lot of them do, but not all of them. And now there's only one ticket left, said Grandpa George. Quite so, sniffed Grandma Georgina. And just as sure as I'll be having cabbage soup for supper tomorrow, that ticket'll go to some nasty little beast who doesn't deserve it. Chapter 9. Grandpa Joe Takes a Gamble. The next day, when Charlie came home from school and went in to see his grandparents, he found that only Grandpa Joe was awake. The other 3 were snoring loudly. Shh, whispered Grandpa Joe, and he asked Charlie to come closer. Charlie tiptoed over and stood beside the bed. The old man gave Charlie a sly grin, and then he started rummaging under his pillow with one hand. And when the hand came out again, there was an ancient leather purse clutched in the fingers. Under cover of the bedclothes, the old man opened the purse and tipped it upside down. Out fell a single silver 10-cent piece. It's my secret hoard, he whispered. The others don't know I've got it. And now you and I are going to have one more fling at finding that last ticket. How about it, eh? But you'll have to help me. Are you sure you want me to spend your money on that, Grandpa? Charlie whispered. Of course I'm sure, spluttered the old man excitedly. Don't stand there arguing. I'm just as crazy as you are to find that ticket. Here, take the money and run down the street to the nearest store and buy the first Wonka candy bar you see and bring it straight back to me, and we'll open it together. Charlie took the little silver coin and slipped quickly out of the room. In 5 minutes, he was back. Have you got it? Whispered Grandpa Joe, his eyes shining with excitement. Charlie nodded and held out the bar of candy. Wonka's Nutty Crunch Surprise, it said on the wrapper. Good, the old man whispered, sitting up in the bed and rubbing his hands. Now come over here and sit close to me and we'll open it together. Are you ready? Yes, Charlie said. I'm ready. All right, you tear it off the first bit then. No, Charlie said. You pay for it. You do it all. The old man's fingers were trembling most terribly as they fumbled with the candy bar. We don't have a hope, really, he whispered, giggling a bit. You do know we don't have a hope, don't you? Yes, Charlie said. I know that. They looked at each other and both started giggling nervously. Mind you, said Grandpa Joe, there's just that tiny chance that it might be the one. Don't you agree? Yes, Charlie said. Of course. Why don't you open it, Grandpa? All in good time, my boy. All in good time. Which end do you think I ought to open first? That corner, the one furthest from you. Just tear off a tiny bit, but not quite enough for us to see anything. Like that? Said the little man. Yes, now a little bit more. You finish it, said Grandpa Joe. I'm too nervous. No, Grandpa, you must do it yourself. Very well then. Here goes. He tore off the wrapper. They both stared at what lay underneath. It was a bar of candy and nothing more. All at once, they both saw the funny side of the whole thing, and they burst into peals of laughter. What the heck's going on? Cried Grandma Josephine, waking up suddenly. Nothing, said Grandpa Joe. You go on back to sleep. Chapter 10. The family begins to go hungry. During the next 2 weeks, the weather turned very cold. First came the snow. It began very suddenly one morning just as Charlie Bucket was getting dressed for school. Standing by the window, he saw the huge flakes drifting slowly down out of an icy sky that was the color of steel. By evening, it lay 4 feet deep around the tiny house, and Mr. Bucket had to dig a path from the front door to the road. After the snow, there came a freezing gale that blew for days and days without stopping. And oh, how bitter cold it was! Everything that Charlie touched seemed to be made of ice, and each time he stepped outside the door, the wind was like a knife on his cheek. Inside the house, little jets of freezing air came rushing in through the sides of the windows and under the doors, and there was no place to go to escape them. The 4 old grandparents lay silently and huddled in their bed, trying to keep the cold out of their bones. The excitement over the golden tickets had long since been forgotten. Nobody in the family gave a thought now to anything except the 2 vital problems of trying to keep warm and trying to get enough to eat. There is something about very cold weather that gives someone an enormous appetite. Most of us find ourselves beginning to crave rich, steaming stews and hot apple pies and all kinds of delicious, warming dishes. Because we're all a great deal luckier than we realize, we usually get what we want, or near enough. But Charlie Bucket never got what he wanted because the family couldn't afford it. And as the cold weather went on, he became ravenously and desperately hungry. Both bars of candy, the birthday one and the one Grandpa Joe had bought, had long since been nibbled away, and all he got now were those thin, cabbagey meals 3 times a day. Then all at once, the meals became even thinner. The reason for this was that the toothpaste factory, the place where Mr. Bucket worked, suddenly went bust and had to close down. Quickly, Mr. Bucket tried to get another job, but he had no luck. In the end, the only way in which he managed to earn a few pennies was by shoveling snow in the streets. But it wasn't enough to buy even a quarter of the food that 7 people needed. The situation became desperate. Breakfast was a single slice of bread for each person now, and lunch was maybe half a boiled potato. Slowly but surely, everyone in the house began to starve. And every day, little Charlie Bucket, trudging through the snow on his way to school, would have to pass Mr. Willy Wonka's giant chocolate factory. And every day, as he came near to it, he would lift his small pointed nose in the air and sniff the wonderful sweet smell of melting chocolate. Sometimes he would stand motionless outside the gates for several minutes on end, taking deep, swallowing breaths, as though he were trying to eat the smell itself. "That child," said Grandpa Joe, poking his head up from under the blanket one icy morning. "That child has got to have more food. It doesn't matter about us. We're too old to bother with. But a growing boy, he can't go on like this. He's beginning to look like a skeleton." "What can one do?" murmured Grandma Josephine miserably. "He refuses to take any of ours. I hear his mother tried to slip her own piece of bread onto his plate at breakfast this morning, but he wouldn't touch it. He made her take it back." "He's a fine little fellow," said Grandpa George. "He deserves better than this." The cruel weather went on, and every day Charlie Bucket grew thinner and thinner. His face became frighteningly white and pinched. The skin was drawn so tightly over the cheeks that you could see the shapes of the bones underneath. It seemed doubtful whether he could go on much longer like this without becoming dangerously ill. And now, very calmly, with that curious wisdom that seems to come so often to small children in the times of hardship, he began to make little changes here and there in some of the things that he did so as to save his strength. In the mornings, he left the house 10 minutes earlier so that he could walk slowly to school without ever having to run. He sat quietly in the classroom during recess, resting himself, while the others rushed outdoors and threw snowballs and wrestled in the snow. Everything he did now, he did slowly and carefully to prevent exhaustion. Then, one afternoon, walking back home with the icy wind in his face, and incidentally feeling hungrier than he had ever felt before, his eye was suddenly caught by a piece of paper that was lying in the gutter in the snow. The paper was of a greenish color, and there was something vaguely familiar about it. Charlie stepped off the curb and bent down to examine it. Part of it was buried under the snow, but he saw at once what it was. It was a dollar bill. Quickly, he looked around him. Had somebody just dropped it? No, that was impossible because of the way part of it was buried. Several people went hurrying past him on the sidewalk, their chins sunk deep in the collars of their coats, their feet crunching in the snow. None of them was searching for any money. None of them was taking the slightest notice of the small boy crouching in the gutter. Then, was it this dollar? Could he have it? Carefully, Charlie pulled it from underneath the snow. It was a damp and dirty, but otherwise perfect. A whole dollar. He held it tightly between his shivering fingers, gazing down at it. It meant one thing to him at the moment, only one thing. It meant food. Automatically, Charlie turned and began moving toward the nearest shop. It was only 10 paces away. It was a newspaper and stationery store, the kind that sells almost everything, including candy and milk. And what he would do, he whispered quickly to himself. He would buy one luscious bar of candy and eat it all up, every bit of it, right then and there, and the rest of the money he would take straight back and give it to his mother. Chapter 11. The Miracle. Charlie entered the store and laid the damp dollar bill on the counter. "One Wonka's whipple scrumptious fudge mellow delight," he said, remembering how much he had loved the one he had on his birthday. The man behind the counter looked fat and well fed. He had big lips and fat cheeks and a very fat neck. He turned and reached behind him for the candy bar. Then he turned back and handed it to Charlie. Charlie grabbed it and quickly tore off the wrapper and took an enormous bite. Then he took another and another, and oh, the joy of being able to cram large pieces of something sweet and solid into one's mouth. The sheer blissful joy of being able to fill one's mouth with rich, solid food. "You look like you wanted that one, Sonny," the shopkeeper said pleasantly. Charlie nodded, his mouth bulging with chocolate. The shopkeeper put Charlie's change on the counter. "Take it easy," he said. "It'll give you a gut ache if you swallow it like that without chewing." Charlie went on woofing the candy. He couldn't stop, and in less than half a minute, the whole thing had disappeared down his throat. He was quite out of breath, but he felt marvelously, extraordinarily happy. He reached out a hand to take the change. Then he paused. His eyes were just above the level of the counter. They were staring at the little silver coins lying there. The coins were all dimes. There were 9 of them, altogether. Surely it wouldn't matter if he spent just one more. "I think," he said quietly, "I think I'll have just one more of those candy bars. The same kind as before, please." "Why not?" the fat shopkeeper said, reaching behind him again and taking another whipple scrumptious fudge mellow delight from the shelf. He laid it on the counter. Charlie picked it up and tore off the wrapper. And suddenly, from underneath the wrapper, there came a brilliant flash of gold. Charlie's heart stood still. "It's a golden ticket!" screamed the shopkeeper, leaping about a foot in the air. "You've got a golden ticket! You found the last golden ticket! Hey, what do you know? Come and look at this, everybody! The kids found Wonka's last golden ticket. There it is. It's right there in his hands." It seemed as though the shopkeeper might be going to have a fit. "In my shop, too," he yelled. "He found it right here in my own little shop. Somebody call the newspapers quick and let them know. Watch out now, Sonny. Don't tear it as you unwrap it. That thing is precious." In a few seconds, there was a crowd of about 20 people clustering around Charlie, and many more were pushing their way in from the street. Everybody wanted to get a look at the golden ticket and at the lucky finder. "Where is it?" someone shouted. "Hold it up so all of us can see it." "There it is, there," someone shouted. "He's holding it in his hands. See the gold shining." "How did he manage to find it, I'd like to know," a large boy shouted angrily. 20 bars a day I've been buying for weeks and weeks. Think of all the free stuff he'll be getting too," another boy said enviously. "A lifetime supply." "He'll need it, the skinny little shrimp," the girl said, laughing. Charlie hadn't moved. He didn't even unwrap the golden ticket from around the candy bar. He was standing very still, holding it tightly with both hands while the crowd pushed and shouted all around him. He felt quite dizzy. There was a peculiar floating sensation coming over him, as though he were floating up in the air like a balloon. His feet didn't seem to be touching the ground at all. He could hear his heart thumping away loudly somewhere in his throat. At that point, he became aware of a hand resting lightly on his shoulder, and when he looked up, he saw a tall man standing over him. "Listen," the man whispered, "I'll buy it from you. I'll give you $50, how about that? And I'll give you a new bicycle as well, okay?" "Are you crazy?" shouted a woman who was standing equally close. Why, I'd give him $500 for that ticket. You want to sell that ticket for $500, young man? That's quite enough of that, the fat shopkeeper shouted, pushing his way through the crowd and taking Charlie firmly by the arm. Leave the kid alone, will you? Make way there. Let him out. And to Charlie, as he led him to the door, he whispered, Don't you let anybody have it. Take it straight home quickly before you lose it. Run all the way and don't stop till you get there, you understand? Charlie nodded. You know something? The fat shopkeeper said, pausing a moment and smiling at Charlie. I have a feeling you needed a break like this. It's awfully glad you got it. Good luck to you, Sonny. Thank you, Charlie said, and off he went, running through the snow as fast as his legs would go. And as he flew past Mr. Willy Wonka's factory, he turned and waved at it and sang out, I'll be seeing you. I'll be seeing you soon. And 5 minutes later, he arrived at his own home. But what happens next, we will find out tomorrow. That's it for today's reading. Thanks a lot for tuning in, and I hope you watch again tomorrow. I'm going to pick up from this spot and see what happens to Charlie and his golden ticket that he just found. So see you tomorrow at 4, and have a great day.